Hey guys, what's happening? So now with getting back into Future State, Dark Detective, I've been very much enjoying just the way that Mariko Tamaki has been delivering the narrative of this story, with us figuring out what's going on in Gotham in 2027, like alongside with Bruce Wayne's investigation, especially with it having a number of ties that reach back to before death metal. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so you can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back into the year 2027 with Bruce's story, prior to this point we had talked about how the Magistrate had taken over and some of the top reasons why they want Batman dead, rather than just killing Bruce Wayne. And moving forward, we know that Bruce has now got to use like his knowledge of the history of Gotham and more or less bring together some of these answers throughout his investigation. So it's like now there's a lot that we have to figure out with him along the way. But it's here where we pick up with Bruce, who comes across these kids who are robbing this warehouse, stealing barrels, and this location they've hit a number of times with nothing happening, so they just kind of figure they can keep hitting this place over and over again, which is clearly a recipe for getting caught. And this time around with these kids trying to steal these barrels, that's exactly what happens, with them being spotted by cybers, which are like your automated patrol machines that come from the Magistrate. But the problem with the cybers, which are used to patrol either different areas or merchandise, it's the problem that they prioritize either the merchandise or that location higher than they do human safety, which is why Bruce has to then step in before these kids are seriously hurt or even worse. But when this happens and Bruce takes one of these cybers down, another cyber then grabs him on the shoulder and his mind then jumps back to that night where he was nearly killed by Peacekeeper 1. And I gotta say, like, I really enjoy the way that Mariko Tamaki has been letting the events of that night like just slowly roll out. Because this time around when we revisit that first night, we get a bit more information than what we had seen in the first issue, with it continuing from Bruce being shot and showing us from there like how he barely made it out with his life. But even with seeing this, there's still this lingering question of like, how did Peacekeeper 1 figure out that Bruce Wayne is Batman? Because throughout the course of these flashbacks, Bruce isn't wearing a mask, so it's not like Peacemaker's doing his job, whether chasing down someone with a mask, be it Batman or anyone else. And even if he were, his deal with the mayor is to apprehend, not to execute. So in more than one way, we just know that Peacekeeper, he's kind of got his own agenda going on, which likely is just getting Batman out the picture so the Magistrate doesn't lose their position of authority. But with Bruce being chased by Peacekeeper 1 and having 2 shots in him already, and I ain't talking about liquor, but with him being chased and wounded and forced to run and jump off this pier, and when he thinks back on it, like he thinks of that feeling of sinking into that darkness and just thinking that this is it. But when he jumps in, he also sees another body in the water, which isn't uncommon in Gotham, because in many cases there's either the good or the bad who can wind up like this John Doe who was just tossed in the water. But with seeing this, like the thing is, like fortunately for Bruce, this John Doe, he just happened to be close enough to Bruce as far as height and stature on a dark night in Gotham to lead Peacekeeper to believe by the time that he got to the end of the pier that he had actually killed Bruce Wayne. But nope. Bruce stayed in that water till he nearly like blacked out. And just before he lost consciousness, he allowed himself to float to the top so he could then use that last bit of energy to crawl out. But with us seeing this and seeing how Bruce had actually got away, one of the first things that comes to mind is like the whole argument about Batman always having preparation, which pertaining to the flashback of that night, like it wasn't the case. He wasn't ready. And it's like you take that with the equation of preparation meeting opportunity and that equaling success, which I believe is the equation most of the time. But every now and then, success happens by just sheer luck. And that's what saved Bruce out on that pier. And some skills did come in before that, but luck, it hit the game winner in this one. But after this, Bruce then takes parts from the cybers, and from here we follow Bruce to his new living situation. Because currently with Bruce trying to stay off the grid, he's found himself moving a bit further out of the city to where at the time he's roommates with this guy named Noah, who's very much like your conspiracy theorist. And it's really like your perfect setup, because with Noah, he's very much analog, he doesn't like cameras or cell phones, which is perfect for Bruce because he's not trying to be spotted or have his location pinged anywhere. Plus, Noah's house is one of the few places to where you don't have like your biometric type of entry, which once again keeps Bruce under the radar. But with Bruce staying here with Noah, he's actually going under the name Jeff Marks and renting out Noah's bunker, paying cash only under the guise that Jeff is the graphic designer. But just as an example of how paranoid Noah is, like he even believes that the tap water's tapped, or at least that aliens have put some kind of mind control within the water, and because of that he waits for his daughter Hannah to drop by and just drop off some bottled water. But even when she does, he kind of side eyes her like, where'd you get this at? But down in Noah's bunker, this is where Bruce has set up his own bat cave, if you will. And he made sure to fix the locks on the doors so no one could just run down there and just stumble across his investigation on the Magistrate. Because while Bruce has been out, he's also been bringing back here like spare parts from the cybers along with different evidence which he's collected, and he's put together a wall of information so that he can practically solve his own murder. And once again, like the big question is, how did Peacekeeper 1 know that killing Bruce Wayne would then kill Batman? And to figure that out, Bruce has to find out as much as he can about the Magistrate as well. And with Bruce collecting these clues and pulling that arm from the cyber from earlier, he then realizes that the parts either for these cybers or these drones, that they've all come from 3 manufacturers, which are Plexitech, DraftTech, and Neocorp, which for Bruce are a good lead to start with, because from there he just follows the money and that'll more or less show him who wants what and why. But on his way out the door, he runs into Noah's daughter, Hannah, and she's outside yelling at this other girl who's like taking these pictures in the direction of her father's house. And she asks nicely for the girl not to take pictures of the house, and the girl keeps taking pictures. She says it's her right, it's in the Constitution. But Hannah more or less tells her like, if I told you who I worked for, like you wouldn't be out here getting on my nerves, which scares the other girl off. But it also made Bruce a bit curious, like where exactly does Hannah work? And he does ask her, but she never really answers clearly. She's like, I work a lot of places, that girl's stupid. And it kind of leaves you wondering like, what does Hannah do? Which is something I'm sure we'll find out later on. But after this, Bruce then heads out on a bike that he got from Noah, which he got from Noah in exchange for fixing Noah's TV, which through the process of fixing it, Bruce also bugged it, but Noah don't know that. But from here, with Bruce following his lead on these 3 companies, of which he mentions none of which existed before Joker War. And also all 3 of these companies, they accumulate the profit from the Magistrate's new justice. And it's a really odd setup too, because for example, one of the companies, Plexitech, which is ran by Carl Bennington, whose family's always had money in Gotham doing different manufacturing, but Carl Bennington's leadership was running that company into the ground, which is a stark contrast with his company now, Plexicorp, which has become one of the 3 mega corporations that had began to rise and expand post Joker War. But at this point, with Bruce following Carl Bennington's vehicle, which had then led Bruce to this building where he starts looking around, but then nearly like on every turn when he looks around the corner, he's hearing like this buzzing sound like left and right, and it nearly distracts him enough to set off this motion sensor, but Bruce catches himself just in time using his infrared sensors, but then the bug flies directly into the motion sensors and it sets off the alarm. So much for luck this time. But when this happens, Bruce grabs the bug, he calls for his bike, and he gets out of there because there's too many drones coming in for him to possibly deal with at this moment. But at the moment, we're also seeing that that's kind of the Magistrate's thing, and Bruce recognizes this because even though they outmatch him in sheer brute or even large numbers, where they don't match him is in pure finesse, which is exactly what Bruce does when he uses the bike to lead away the drones so that he can then head off in another direction. But with doing this and Bruce taking a closer look at this bug, which Bruce very much recognizes because it's his, because this micro drone is one of the projects that Lucius had been working on in well before Joker War, and even then still like in its beta stage. But with Lucius Fox designing this micro drone, the original purpose for it was for surveillance and seeing through like little small areas like tunnels and different crevices or whatnot. But even with creating this micro drone, Lucius had warned Bruce that with designing something like this, they're putting this technology out into the world, which of course then means that with doing this, that at some point it could be used against them, which is exactly what Bruce is dealing with now. But with examining this micro drone, Bruce also notices that the cloaking tech on it had recently started to malfunction, which then has Bruce thinking like, was this thing observing him this whole time? And even if so, like for how long was this observing him? And what else exactly does it know? And with realizing this and thinking back to that night in the alley, Bruce remembers that Peacekeeper 1 had already knew who he was and where he was gonna be, and not to mention the truth of his dual identity. And with seeing that, he figures out like this was the Magistrate's plan to stop Batman, keeping eyes on him and more or less taking the shadows away from him and then allowing him to continue as he would, just not knowing that he's being watched. But also it's like if they did that to Bruce, then there's no telling who else they could have done the same to. But while Bruce is down here examining the micro drone, he hears like a crash upstairs and he hears Noah yell, they're watching. But then when Bruce runs upstairs to see what's going on, He only then finds out that Noah had figured out the TV was bugged, which, as we know, Bruce did it, but I don't suspect that Noah has any clue that Jeff Marks, the graphic designer from downstairs, is actually the person who did it. But with Noah being like your tinfoil hat type of guy, it's more likely that this just fortifies like all his other crazy ideas and theories rather than make him more aware of what's really going on. Unless his theory about the aliens is like the underplot of this whole series. And then if that's true, we're in for the plot twist of the century. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.